Hello everyone, this is Charles Wollertz with Wollertz Photography, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. I got an email from Ray asking if I could elaborate a little bit more about my process to photograph beverages on a white background. I've created a series of videos explaining how to photograph drinks in a variety of settings, and this is the first video of that series, and it's about how to photograph and isolate a drink on a white background. So how do we go from this to this? Let's get started. In most genres of photography, natural light is probably the best thing you can use. But when you're trying to isolate an object or a subject like a glass on a white background, I find that artificial light is best. Natural light changes a lot. If a cloud blocks the sun, it's going to change your white balance, it's going to change your exposure. And trying to get consistent results when the light's always changing is almost impossible. So I prefer to use speed lights. Right now I'm using 2 speed lights, and they're double diffused, so it should get a nice soft light on the subject. And the most important thing to isolate on a white background is to figure out your lights. So let's start with this. You want to get enough light on the background, on the white background, to isolate your subject, and try to get as much as possible on camera and leave as little as possible to the editing. So right now we got to figure out how much light we need on the white background to isolate this without adding glare or just softness to the edges. I don't have a light meter, so I just go by experience and trial and error. So let me set the lights probably on at a lower setting and go from there. So here's the first test shot, and I want to see how much light I need on the background. I'm not worried about the drink yet, I just want to get the background dialed in. So the camera tells me, if I hit the info, how much of it is overexposed or underexposed, and right now it's barely overexposed on the white background, which is perfect. That means that just a slight tweak on Lightroom and it's going to get that isolated. So now we can move and focus on the drink itself. So depending on the color of your drink, you're going to have to add or remove light or add a black card to get definition on the glassware. Right now, because it's a clear drink, it's a martini, the backlight is enough to light through the whole drink, and this light above it lights up the olives very nicely. So I don't need to add any other light to the front, but I do need some definition on the glass, which is why I've created this little table looking thing. It's a black poster board, and I just cut to the height of the glass, give myself a few inches, and with a little bit of tape and magic, I got a little cube that gives me definition on the glass. So just by shooting through this, I get enough light on the background to isolate it, and I get enough light and I get enough shadows and definition on the cocktail itself. So let me take a quick test shot here. I'm not gonna block that light. I'm using this little camera. It's a Canon M6 Mark II, and it doesn't have a viewfinder. Yeah, that looks good. So my biggest problem right now, it's on purpose. I'm using this little camera, and I'm using it's a mirrorless camera, and I have the screen telling me what the image is going to look like. So it's doing this exposure simulation. It's telling me right now that there's no light coming through, and that's because I'm using the flashes. If I was to see the image, if I was to see the glass, that means there's outside lights that's going to influence the color temperature of the speed lights. And I don't want that. I want to keep the same color temperature throughout the image. I don't want any outside light influence. Right now, I think I got everything dialed in. Based on the color of the drink for this setup, I like the results I'm getting. So I'm going to show you here a couple of test shots. And from there we can go into make a real drink and get some better pictures. once you got your lighting set up and everything dialed in the way you wanted, you got to come up with a cocktail. For this one, I made a Manhattan, and that's just because it's one of my favorite drinks. I washed the glass and I put it in the freezer because I want to get that texture on the glass, that frozen texture. You could also use glycerin, a mixture of glycerin and water. When you're shooting on a white background, that doesn't always show up as well as the frozen texture of water. So right now my glass is in the freezer. I put some water on the outside and I froze it. I washed it and make sure I took away any fingerprints, any oil, anything that could have been on that glass. Prepping your tools, prepping your subject is probably one of the most important things you can do. So let's get started. Let's get the shoot going. See, in photography, there's something called the, I guess it's more than just photography, but the inverse square law for light. And what that says is that for every time you double the distance of the light, you only get a quarter of the power of that light. So if I was to move this light double what it is here, I would have to put the power up 4 times that much. Or something like that. It's very complicated. I'd rather do trial and error. Depending on the color of your drink and the type of your glass, you might have to adjust your lighting a little bit. For this, using another black or a white card can help. So right now I'm using a red wine glass, a stainless wine glass with a logo. And if you are shooting something for someone, you want to make sure the logo is centered and then that it's the focus of attention. So right now, I got it right in the middle. If I take a picture using the same settings I was using before, I can see that it's a little dark on the bottom. So by adding, let me do it this way, it's going to reflect light back from the background, bouncing off of this light. So from here, that looks much better. Using the same light that we have here, we can play a little bit and we can do things for holidays, for different seasons, for different times of the year. For this light, I believe I'm gonna need a little bit more dark. I took away the feature of exposure simulation in the camera. This way I can see what I'm doing now that I know that with those settings I had dialed in, I'm not getting any artificial light or any other light influencing my image. You also got to remember, you got to know what you're taking a picture of. If you're taking a picture of beer, it can go flat fairly quickly. So just adding a little bit of salt can bring it back to life and give you just a couple of seconds to get the perfect shot. You can also buy fake ice, and this will help you keep the drink looking fresh while you're setting up and you dialing in your lights. You don't have to worry about the drink melting or dying on you. With these fake ice cubes that look pretty real, you can get amazing results. I just ordered these online, and you know, I've used them over and over again. You can even freeze them to get that cool look, but they look best when they're nice and shiny. Cheers. So just to summarize things here and wrap things up, lighting is key when you're trying to isolate on a white background. Once you have your light set up to isolate that background, and you have your little tint or black card side, the other side, however you prefer to get that detail on your glass, all you have to do is minute changes to get different glassware, different shapes, different colors. Once you get your lighting figured out, now it's time to prepare your glassware. Make sure you clean it, you wash it, you get rid of all those fingerprints. anything that's not gonna look good in a picture. When you put that image in your computer and you zoom in, you're gonna find every crack, every time it went through a dishwasher, you're gonna find everything that was wrong with that glass. A very common trick is using glycerin and water to add spray on, and to add that sweat, that dripping water on your cocktail, on your glass, on your beer bottle, on your beer can. You can always use mocktails for pictures, but I prefer using the real thing because at the end of the photo shoot, you get to enjoy it. There was a few things I missed when I was filming this video, and it's I don't know how other YouTubers do it because it is very difficult to organize your ideas and thoughts and make a video that's very informative and clean and precise, and I failed on my first try. So let me add a couple of things here. One thing I forgot to mention is whenever you're using speed lights, there's 3 ways or multiple ways really to adjust your exposure. I usually shoot at my max sync speed. In this case it's 200th of a second, and then I adjust my aperture and my ISO. You can also move your lights closer or further away. The closer you move the light, the more contrast light you're gonna get. It's gonna be a little bit harsher light. And then if you move it further away, it's gonna be a softer light. But to adjust your exposure, you can adjust the lights, you can adjust your aperture and your ISO, or as I mentioned, moving the lights closer or further away. You have to be very careful when you make these adjustments because you don't want any ambient light interfering with your final result. And then one more thing, talking about the lights. So to isolate a white, my main light is on the white background. And then I use another light to fill in on the drink. So in this case, I had my one light directly on the background, pretty close, so it wouldn't affect the cocktail itself. And then another one from above, lighting the top and the side of that glass. Using this tabletop cutout, the glassware takes on the color of whatever you put around it. That's why I use black, and then gives me definition on the edges of that glass. So as far as the gear I used here, I use this PVC roll. It's roughly 20 inches wide by 50 inches long, and it's a PVC roll, so it's easy to clean, it's easy to transport, and it's easy to store. It doesn't get damaged or dirty that easily. For my remote triggers, I bought these. Let me see if we can see that it's an ice chute. That's a transmitter, and it has 3 remote triggers. So I can't find these online anymore, but there's something comparable for like 30 bucks. They're very cheap, but they're very efficient. You just put these on your speed lights and that one on your camera, and whenever you click, it takes a picture. They don't have high-speed sync. That's why my max sync speed is 200 to 250th of a second. As far as speed lights, I have a few of these Canon 430EX2. This is the older version of these Canon speed lights, and you can buy them used for like 130 bucks. There's cheaper options out there that don't necessarily have to be better or worse. I like Canon because they talk to my equipment when I use it on camera. But you can also get something like this. They're an off-brand. These are newer, and these you could get a pack of 2 for like 100 bucks or less. I also use my diffuser. They're 36-inch diffusers, and they're double diffused. And as far as light stands, I have so many. I've accumulated light stands over the years, and then the boom arm that goes above it. That was the one that's a little bit more expensive, but they're still not out of budget. You know, that you could set a whole studio. My studio cost me $660 to set up, and with off-brand lights, you could knock that down by over $200. So for under 500 bucks, you could have a tabletop studio. And it's just practice. The more you use these lights, the more you practice, the better you get at it. A lot of people like to use a light meter, and that's great. You know, you send a test shot with fire the flashes, and it'll tell you what f-stop you need to use. And that's a great tool to have. I don't use one. I've never have. I just go by trial and error. So for me, I've done this so much, and I use the same studio over and over again, that I'm very familiar with my camera settings and my flash settings. And like I said, it's just practice. The light meters are great, but they give you a perfect exposure, which is what your camera would do. In this case, I'm trying to isolate on white, so you will have to adjust the exposure compensation of the camera or the flash. So there's a little bit more involved than not just using what your light meter tells you. One trick I like to do when I'm just kind of guessing or just playing around with what I think the exposure is going to be like is setting my ISO at 200 to 250. Then I can adjust, I can lower the exposure or increase it using my ISO without touching any of my other settings. 250 to 400 is a good enough range that you're not going to see noticeable noise on any of your images. And then you could always adjust after you find your perfect exposure. When you're taking pictures and you got your set and everything is ready, take a quick picture and then load it onto your computer. Make sure everything is perfect. No chips on the glass or lipstick or a hair, something there's always something there that you don't see until you bring that to your computer. If you have an external monitor, by any means use it. Zoom in and look at everything as close as you can. Try to find any mistakes or any imperfections while you're shooting, and that'll save you a lot of time in post. So there was something I noticed when I was editing this wine picture, this wine glass, and I could see the reflection of my little contrast table thing here. And I didn't see that when I was taking the pictures. I noticed it when I brought it into Lightroom. So let me show you here real quick how easy it is to fix something like that. And all I did was use the brush tool and just drop the exposure by 1 or 2 stops on the lighter part, and then it faded in. Feathering it at 50 or 80%, it softens the edge, so you can fade that in to the darker side, and it looks so much better. When you're editing and isolating on white, I wasn't counting on this is the first time I use this little camera for pictures, and when I was shooting these items on white, I wasn't counting on the incredible dynamic range of this little camera. So this is the Canon, I don't even know what it is, the Canon M6 Mark II, and I'm impressed with the dynamic range of the raw images of this camera. So I had to overexpose a little bit more because what the camera was telling me was for JPEGs. Once I loaded it in the computer as a raw image, it didn't quite translate. Your gear doesn't matter, but it's important that you know how your gear works. You need to trust your gear. You need to know what you're using so that you can use it to its full potential. And now I know that this camera saves a lot of information in the highlights. So I did the reverse of what I did with the wine glass. Use your brush tool and just overexpose, and just with a soft brush with a feather like 50 or 80%, you just paint it along the edge and completely isolate your drink. Alright, and I think that's everything for this video. If you have any questions, if there's anything I missed, if there's anything that you want me to add in a future video, please let me know in the comments or send me an email. I'm going to do my best to try to answer any questions. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. Please subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you next time. Bye.